you go about introducing these concepts to your clients about trying something, something that they've never done before?
So these are all genuine projects, first of all. These aren't sort of hypotheticals, sort of this is how you could approach something. These are genuine projects that we did. And we, as Andy mentioned at the beginning, we've been going now for coming up to 5 years. So we have been doing these sorts of projects, many others like it. So this isn't, I'm trying to sort of frame this quite carefully and not tell you that this is the future, because this is what is happening right now. But your second question, I think, is very, very important, because the biggest challenge for us, and I'm sure we've touched on it quite a lot over this conference already, is the need to educate, and we, even though we are, I guess, first and foremost a tech provider, we cannot just take a role of like, here's the platform, you can get on with it. We have to actually advise people. A big part of our role is about consulting with people, advising them, getting as far into the process, as early into the process as we can, so that people are happy to come to us and say, I've got this brief, could be a bit mobile-y, can you give me some advice? And advise them on how they might approach it, the sorts of things to consider when they're writing questionnaires as a consequence, including how you set up something that's not going to leave you in a bit of a state when it comes to analyze it as well. So education and pushing the kind of market forward is absolutely key and fundamental, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Neil, for sharing some of that outcome of the research. And Andy, great job on your introduction. You practiced that? Good work. Andy is on our conference board this year. So if you would like to learn about how fabulous that participation is, you can feel free to talk to him. So we're going to keep moving right along because I know we're behind schedule a little bit. So next we're going to talk about a hot topic, unlocking the potential of APIs and taking a deep dive into actually how they're utilized, some of the benefits, overcoming the challenges. And to get us started, I want to welcome Don Golden, President and CEO of Precision Sample.
Thank you very much. How's everybody doing today? Getting over our lunch food comas? A little bit. So APIs may not seem exciting on the surface, but with the changes that they're bringing around in our industry, I hope you all, I think there's probably some of the foremost survey and research API experts in the industry sitting in this room already. Maybe some folks that aren't so interested in it or haven't actually taken their business down the road of APIs, but there's so many benefits that my company, Precision Sample, is seeing from them, as well as all of the members of our panel that we felt it was interesting to talk about. So quickly, just to introduce everybody on the panel, we have Daniel Ross from Protege, Oscar Carlsson from Cint, and Alex Leger from MarketCube. Just going to click forward here. Green button, that one. Oh, back. So a quick overview on what the situation is with APIs in the industry. I thought it was interesting to just set the stage as we go into the discussion. So quickly, I think everybody is aware that APIs are proliferating across the internet. You're finding everything from Facebook Connect to integrating with various social platforms. And of course, the sample industry and the market research industry is going into them quickly as well. We're seeing deployments on them not only for sample companies accessing sample, but also market research companies are putting out buy-side and demand-side APIs as well. A term that I'm coining is sharing economy panels. So as we were talking about earlier, and there's been a lot of talk in the industry about traditional panels dying, frankly, they're being replaced with what I call precision sample sharing economy panels. And that is the process of sample companies plugging into lots of different sources that maybe we used to recruit from in the past, and then also, but then getting one level closer to them and accessing new audiences for research. The confusing part of it is that everybody's doing it a little bit differently. And so what we're going to talk about today is how all of us are accessing different audiences, buying and selling research using APIs. So really quickly to break down the types of APIs that we have out there, we have supply-side APIs. So that's the process of panel companies plugging into various websites. There's two main types of supply-side APIs that are out there right now. We have member-level APIs, and what that is typically is that the research panel company will hold the information about the panelist, and through the API, select specific respondents that they want to have access to the partners. And then, so all of the quota management and profiling is done by the panel company. And then there is also a survey-level API, which is essentially a data dump. Here's the list of all the available surveys that we have in our system today. Here are all the quotas, here are the qualifications for those quotas, and let the suppliers pick the respondents that are appropriate for it. So there's a lot of pros. The members level API, panel companies have a lot more control over the supply of the sample, but it's not as flexible for the suppliers. And then the inverse is true for member level APIs. And then another set of APIs is to be able to create a project, for a buyer to create a project in a panel system, and then set that project up, define the requirements for it, open, close, launch the sample, et cetera. So I've probably talked too much already. We'll go into the discussion. And I wanted to first actually have everybody on the panel here introduce themselves and maybe talk a little bit about how your company is generating benefits from APIs.
Great. Hi, I'm Daniel Ross with Protege. The way we typically use APIs, it's either we're consuming third-party APIs or we're supplying APIs to third parties. So we work in both capacities. So on the consumption side, we are offering feasibility APIs, we're offering pricing APIs, and project quota creation APIs. And then on the flip side, we're integrating with third parties to offer quality validation as well. So we work on kind of both sides, consumer and our own.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Oscar Carlsson from I'm Oscar Carlsson from Cint. We are a platform, so we have all types of APIs as well. So both supply side APIs and demand side APIs. We mostly offer our own APIs and set a standard to the partners we work with, but also we consume other APIs, especially in third-party API sources and so on. So we're pretty familiar, and we have around 150 API integrations with partners on both sides currently. So.
Hi, Alex Leche from MarketCube. Like the others have said before, we have buy-side and sell-side APIs. We're working on building out our feasibility API as well too, so bidding can be done automatically, as well as third-party APIs too. So I guess we're all doing the same thing.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah. And quickly for Precision Sample, we've been building sharing economy panels since 2011. We have approximately 65 supply-side partners integrated with us, and we work with a couple of select clients working with their demand-side APIs. I can say, definitely for, Precision Sample, we've been able to scale the company, really rapidly and access really new, broad, and different types of sample sources that haven't had access to the market research industry before, and it's been a big boon for the company. So jumping right into the discussion, maybe we'll go down and maybe start with Alex. So what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing working in the industry with APIs today?
I think the number one for me is the challenge with standardization. As soon as you start talking to somebody about an API, you need to figure out what do you call a quota? How do you set up a quota? You say gender, but what does that actually mean in your system? What are your income levels? So trying to make sure everybody's talking the same language is difficult. Every API seems to be a little bit different from each other, whereas we actually all mean the same exact thing, but we talk in different words about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think my biggest challenge, just stepping back, is from sort of the sales side when we start offering APIs, and really for me as a product guy to cut through the hype around APIs. It's actually, what is the purpose? Why are we doing this integration? And getting down to the purpose of why we're doing things, and just making sure that that's as streamlined as possible, because a lot of the initial discussions end up being not an API integration, but just a manual or DIY service.
And I agree with what Alex was saying as far as the data mapping goes. There's 90 different ways companies define income levels. So we have to map to all these third-party APIs. And then I would say secondly, scalability. So I've worked with hundreds of APIs, and the biggest challenge we have is we go live with the API and we get that call from the partner and they say, wait a minute, stop. You completely blew our system up with all your traffic or all your API calls. So I think that's one due diligence that you have to do, is before getting too much into the bed with an API partner, is just make sure they can handle your volume, because the last thing you want to do is spend months upon months developing and then you go live and you got to turn back and start from square one.
Mm-hmm. So backing up a little bit to the different types of APIs, do you find there are specific challenges with a member level versus a survey level API, and does your organization have preferences there?
That's a tough one. I think with the survey one, you get much more detail about what you're getting yourself into. You can make the call yourself. You can see they have 10 surveys or they have 100,000 surveys. You can get a good grasp of that. With the member one, you don't really understand what's going to happen if you are the supplier side of the equation. So you know you're going to set it up, but you're not sure what the experience is going to be like. It's much harder to validate that beforehand. And then, of course, afterwards, there's the challenges you already outlined.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree that the member level APIs are probably a lot more like a Chinese menu, depending on the partner that you work with. They pick and choose certain functionality, which they mirror over to your platform. So it's a bit more support around understanding the partner's platform in that, to really guide them in the right functions in the API and making sure all of those things work. Where the survey level API is pretty much, it's the same process. You show the available service you have, and partners feed in traffic to that.
Yep, yep.
And with the member level APIs, you still continue to have that challenge of data mapping. Actually, on both sides, you have that challenge where you have different definitions of income and ethnicity. And so with either, you have to deal with that, whether you're taking a survey feed and displaying it to users, or you're integrating with the member API. You have to essentially do the same thing.
Yep, yep, absolutely. So Daniel, you said something interesting before that I think really leads us into our next conversation topic, is evaluating APIs.
Yep.
Certainly, I think we've all had the experience of an API not being able to handle some of the load that we're delivering to them. But are you actively including kind of doing load testing on your partner surveys along with your evaluation of the APIs you are picking up and are not picking up?
That's right. Yeah, we learned very early on with API. Our first API is we need to go through that due diligence and make sure that they can handle our load. So part of that, as you mentioned, is load testing. And for those in the audience that are not as geeky as us up here, you're essentially simulating as many different requests to the API all at once. So we essentially act as if we're 50,000 panelists at a given moment, just hitting the APIs constantly. So we go through that. Revenue opportunity obviously is the biggest thing here. I get calls from salespeople, and API is that buzzword. API, when can we have it done? But there's not much more to that. And so I typically like to respond with the typical product manager question of what is the revenue potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's really important to understand. I'll let the others share their challenges as well there.
No, definitely. I think a big part of this is the partner that you're working with. Are they actually capable? Do they have developers in-house? Do they bring on board third-party developers that don't really understand their own platform, and then add the complexity of understanding another platform? I think that's something that's usually overseen. You think it's just plug and play and API, but it's a lot of complexity, and it's getting more and more complex the more we build out the APIs. And that's why standardization is important, but it's a lot more features being added to the feature set of APIs. But I think that, and again, the purpose for me is really important. Why are we doing this? In a lot of cases, it's maybe a first step could be just to do it manually, step by step, and just learning each other and learning how the other platform works, and then move over to an API integration step 2. It's boring, you want to automate things at once, but maybe that's a quicker way to get the better end result.
I think one of the other ways to API opportunities, you might say, okay, this is most revenue, this is the next most revenue, but it really is a two-way thing too. You have to be ready when your partner is also ready as well. So sometimes it's like, okay, we have to schedule this for 6 months later, even though it's the thing I want to do right now, because that's when we all meet up, when our resources are both available too. So sometimes it's real world scheduling conflicts meet with what we actually want to do.
So what changes are you guys seeing with the APIs you're offering, the APIs that you're ingesting from various clients and partners? Where do you think we're going next with APIs?
I think from my side, mobile, right, we've probably, what count are we up to now on the term mobile? Probably 99 at this point. But so mobile in the form of mobile SDK, software development kits. So that's the direction I think we're going here. So less about what can we show on the web on a desktop, but what can we leverage on the mobile device. And I think Patrick mentioned this something yesterday as part of their plans as far as geofencing and leveraging the capabilities of the smartphone. That's where I think we're going in terms of API development, and less on the desktop.
Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. SDKs mobile is definitely one of the hotspots going forward. Another thing is that since we're having this discussion up here and we're talking more about APIs, the level of sophistication of the APIs and the feature set that we offer is going to be a lot more complex or detailed, really. Before it was pretty rudimentary, how we talk to each other. Now it's very much into detail on each and every status, what happened when we sent this person in, why was he terminated, and so on, to really provide a lot more visibility what happens with the traffic that we send back and forth. So the reporting there, I think, is a huge element, and a lot more companies are ready to consume those reports and provide those reports as well. So.
I think it all comes down to the respondent experience. So respondent experience on mobile we need to account for sure. We also need to go and figure out which surveys are the best conversion as a supplier and also as a buyer, to go and look at those bad converting surveys too and say, what can we do to improve those? Instead of just having somebody manually select these out though, have an automated way to go and bring those back in and review them. Also to maybe even break down the elements of a survey. So instead of saying, here's a survey, you could say, here's the individual questions associated with the survey, so that the supplier themselves can provide a better experience displaying the questions in the format that's native to the supplier's environment.
Yeah, I agree with what Alex was just saying, because I think we saw early on an elderly panelist saying she has to answer her income question about 10 times over the course of 5 surveys maybe. And so from the API perspective, we can do a better job passing that data to providers, and they should enlist the trust of us that we're sending the correct data to them and not have to re-ask that in a survey. So I see the people APIs being formed in the near future.
Interesting. So I think that one of the biggest challenges for new companies coming into the API space is really the business rules that that have to be at play, the algorithms, the optimization algorithms that really have to be inserted into the system, and then of course tweaked on an ongoing basis. Are any of your companies actually actively working with or creating guides and best practices around how your new partners should really go in and approach those and get the best result?
I don't think there's a magic bullet that accomplishes everything with regards to when do you turn off a survey, when do you enable it. There's various things we have to look at here, but we're constantly optimizing and making sure that we are, for example, if we see 1,000 clicks into a survey and 1 completes, why continue to send traffic to that survey? So when we're automating, it's not just about let's plug it in and let it go, and then we can sit back and relax and let the revenue flow in. You have to constantly be evaluating these surveys and making sure that you're taking action appropriately. So you got to build the smarts into it.
Yeah.
And of course, we're creating best practices within Cint. That's one thing that we're doing with so many integrations. and I know that other big platforms as well, Lucid is doing the same. So definitely there's a lot happening there, and we're sharing more knowledge amongst the companies, and also from last year's SampleCon, starting a couple of initiatives, and Castro has the initiative as well to standardize things like demographics, which I'm a part of that group, and helping out with that, and also what is incidence rate, what is conversion, getting all of these things lined out so we can agree on that. That makes it so much easier to set the rules within the APIs.
I think there's two approaches that we need to take. One is providing a very detailed view for advanced consumers. So if you can go and display the 1,000 data points associated with that survey, they can build a perfect algorithm on their end. The other thing that we need to do is also build a simple interface too. Say, this survey is the best one, just go ahead and take this one first if you can. This is the way to go, and this is the second, the third too. So people who do want to do an API integration, who need to do that for many different purposes, don't have to go and also spend an extra month or two trying to swim in your inventory because they don't know which one's best. And they keep matching up response in the wrong way.
Very good. So what do you guys see as next? What are the big picture things that your organizations are working on to take the next step for APIs and generate more opportunity?
Quality, that's another word we've heard many times today, but integrating with third-party quality APIs, not just the typical ones that we hear of in the industry, but also going beyond there. So, for example, mobile verification. We talked about double opt-in earlier, where email is slowly dying, or quickly dying, I should say. So for an example of that is we're integrating with third-party mobile verification API, actually we already have, and as soon as someone signs up, we can text them a code, just like you would on Facebook. So if you signed up for Facebook on your mobile device, you likely got a text, and you have to put a code in. So I think that's where we're growing in terms of data quality. We have to enhance that in our APIs.
Yeah, I think one thing is getting more and more advanced in the APIs and offering a lot more and opening a lot of things up. But also, as you say, third-party platforms getting more third-party data into and populating the panel, so we don't have to ask a lot of questions. We can get those data points anyway from other platforms out there. So I think that will be a big thing. And also, since we're already standardizing demographics and working on that, I think the next thing there is probably start standardizing behavioral data as well. So if you capture some data points in a mobile app from a partner, that you can pipe that in and target on those attributes as well. Something that's not done that much today, but I think that will grow a lot.
I definitely echo what these guys have just said too, but also like to add on that in the new sharing economy, where we're all trying to work together very well, we also need to worry about deduplication as well, because we have the same response, you're aiming at the same survey, and maybe on more than one panel. So we need to figure out a way to be open enough and say who has already taken this survey, identifying them in some way, either by IP address or PID, so that way we can give the better experience for our members, because we're all working together.
And as we make that shift to mobile device IDs, we've all heard that term before.
Yeah.
Device IDs is kind of that fingerprint for the mobile device. So as we make that shift, I think we could start to leverage that from a identity verification and deduplication standpoint as well.
Absolutely. All right, great. Well, I think actually we kind of raced through it. Do you guys have anything on? We definitely have some extra time here. Is there any other talking points that you think might be interesting for the audience to?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how many here work with APIs today and actively work with APIs or partners.
A lot of hands.
Yeah, a lot of hands.
A lot of hands. Well, relatively, but increasing every year, I imagine. Is anybody? We would love to hear about everybody in the audience's experience with APIs and where you think you're going next. We certainly have some time to chat about it. Jake?
Was that you or me? I don't know.
But being that a lot of us in here kind of initiate those conversations and don't have to deliver on the promises the way that the three of you up there do, is there any advice that you can give the people in the room, any of you, on how we should approach those conversations to ensure, we're eliminating some of the steps that could could cause a lag in time.
Well, I have a question for everyone here. How long do you think an API integration takes? Yeah. So if you think it takes 1 month, raise your hand. 2 months? Yeah, so I think everybody's going to be a little bit timid here, but it's definitely a time element.
I've seen APIs take actually as little as a couple weeks to a couple years. It really depends on what you're doing and how simple that API is. So as we get to standards of API, has someone built an API that a developer isn't going to look at and literally quit his job that day? So we have to really look at that and consider that in the timing. I've seen it happen very quickly.
Yeah, I think what we've definitely seen is that sometimes APIs can go up really quickly, but to actually get them dialed in and optimized can take 6 months to a year by the time you're finally done with it.
Yeah.
I can just add, we're working a lot on scalability, so it's a great question from Jake there. And I think it takes some time for everyone involved in both the sales team and operations to really understand the complexities of the APIs, learn what we do offer, what we won't offer, and so on. So that's one part of it, that we're doing a lot of training internally just so we know what we can offer and so on, speed up those discussions. But also the other thing is to bring a product expert into the conversation as soon as possible. You'll probably save a lot of time, and they can say what's possible, what's not possible, and direct you in the right direction there.
To directly answer the question, probably the best thing you can do, like Oscar was saying, is bring an expert in and get a time estimate from them, and then go and talk with the client saying, here, it's probably going to take us 4 months.
You talked a little bit about standardization. How can you gain that, and what kind of organizations are we going to need, or input from what kind of people to come to some kind of a standard? Because saying it's easy, but when you get into anything like this, it's really, really difficult to get a bunch of people to agree to that. So I'm just throwing that out there. How do you think we can approach that and get that done?
Well, I think there's data standards, and then there's tech development standards. So I think on the data standard side, Oscar mentioned this CASRA forum where they're trying to define what ethnicity is, what income is, and then on the programming side, on the tech side, making sure that you're adhering to standard development coding. So that's some of the things that you have to kind of consider when you're developing against an API. So programmers don't want to look at API documentation, and if it's not to their standards from a tech perspective, then they're not going to develop it. We'll have to move on to the next partner or next client. So there are development standards out there, and those have been established by Facebook, Twitter, and all the big guys that are exposing APIs today. And then you have on the other side the data standards.
I still think you're going to have a problem when you get the people to say, what is income? How do you do some of those things? Because in working with, I was from CPG background, getting people to agree on many of those things is very difficult. So I think you got a tough job.
Yeah, maybe Oscar could
Yeah,
talk about
I
on the
agree
forum.
on the data standards. That will never be as strong as the people that adopt to it. So we really have to get buy-in from all the big companies in the space, both us from the tech side, but also big buyers, of course, to really agree to any standards. So we would like to include everyone into those discussions, and we're having a session tomorrow on those standards as well, so we can get to talk more about that then. But definitely, I think that's important, and the way we have to tailor those standards is the lowest common denominator, so everyone can sort of follow them. But then we can use them in different purposes, like for targeting purposes is one purpose of using a standard, and that's very important for programmatic, is that we can use these standards to target the right people that we want, and suppliers can profile their panels on this.
So you spoke about some of the pricing and integrations and mapping. What about feasibility? Are there a lot of clients asking about how to tap into what your feasibility is in an automated fashion, and how do you go about that?
I would say it's not as well developed as the buying and selling after a project has been launched. that still needs to be done. The operational side is much easier to convince about adopting the efficiencies. The sales side tends to be a little bit harder to. There's also such a wider variety of what's possible versus what has actually been done. So trying to go and encapsulate some of the possibilities out there is difficult. I think we need to start simple as possible to return some basic numbers, and then after that build on there and do some iterations before we get to a solid place with feasibility. I'd say it's a year or two behind where the operational aspects are.
I think as a platform, it's hard to sort of standardize feasibility over all the partners we work with because not all of them can provide feasibility, and we only see a part of sort of the universe they are in. So we can only estimate what we're seeing going through our platform in terms of feasibility, and if we don't get any data from them, or if we have different standards of reporting feasibility, that's extremely hard as a platform to aggregate all those different feasibility numbers and provide something to the users of our platform.
And I think we could be smarter about the way we're calculating feasibility as opposed to, here's the raw count, right? We have 15 million or 18 million panelists that fit this demographic. Are you going to really get 18 million members to complete that survey? No. So I think what we have to do as a best practice is inject past participation activity into those feasibility calculations, into those algorithms, to really give you a true sense of how many respondents you're actually going to get.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of, as we all know, generating feasibility on any project is part science and then a good portion of art to really understand, the screening criteria that, we really don't have any, good consolidated research on. So it's definitely a challenge. I think, everybody's, working towards it, but it's a tricky thing for sure.
There's a lot of different factors, seasonality, all these things that sort of throw things under the bus when you think that you have a good number, and then suddenly Christmas came and you worked up past participation, and they're completely off when you just look at those weeks. So you have to factor in. So it takes time to sort of build up the amount of data you need to actually provide really good feasibility.
Or even just the weekend, accounting for just the day of the week.
Mm-hmm. True. Patrick?
I just want to hear more about maintenance of an API versus just the integration. Maintenance versus integration of the API. I want to hear how you're feeling about long-term sustainability of APIs as you do the work.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's one of the misconceptions of APIs is we finish, we're done, let's let it run, sit on the couch, no problem. So yeah, maintenance, we have to constantly fine-tune the APIs. On the back end, on the algorithmic side, if there's new servers coming into play, scalability, we have to constantly keep up with the demands of third-party APIs. I think one thing that all client APIs should do is, what they call in the tech world being backward compatible. So what that essentially means is if third party makes a change to their API, it doesn't break your integration. So we want to make sure that every change we're making to an API, they're backward compatible, it's not going to break our integration, and we'll put that into one of our cycles. But maintenance, unfortunately, never stops. We have to constantly fine-tune.
Yeah, I agree. It's we don't have any breaking changes when we develop new things in our API. So if we have to rebuild a feature, we build a second feature, and we still support the old one. So that's a challenge for us, especially over time when we don't really version and upgrade the entire API. We still support the entire feature set. And of course, over time, that will be a lot of things to support. But also, every API integration we have is in terms of support. So we have to respect when we go into partnership with a company to see, is this really worth for both parties to have this integration? Do we have a return on this? How long time do we have to support this? Because if something breaks, we need to have some of our key people there troubleshooting, making sure that we fix that right away, because it could be that we're not earning money with that partner if something breaks, and we need to fix that quickly. So definitely we have to have the support and backup on our side and the client as well to troubleshoot and fix that as soon as possible.
There'll also be a difference between if you're consuming or if you're pushing out the API too. The more you're on the consuming side of it, the much more you worry about maintenance, because you need to make changes quickly when a new technology is released or you're behind the schedule. But when you're actually pushing out the API, when you're the client side of it, You can release any updates on your own schedule. You should do versioning if you're very nice. That's the way to go for sure. But you have much more flexibility there too. So I think the amount of time you have to spend on maintenance depends upon how much on the supply side and how much on the buy side of the equation you are.
Anybody else have any thoughts on the future?
Within the organization? Is it the product person? Who's ultimately accountable in your organizations for the API optimization?
It's really a partnership between business and product. And then product works with the engineering team to make it happen. But I don't think it's a sole group that is deciding one way or another. But I do think it's both business and product. And then the engineers go into their rooms and make it happen for us.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a lot of responsibility is on the product team, and we have a pretty big product organization at Cint. So we take a lot of responsibility within the product team, but definitely work closely with the business side to make sure that we build the right things, that we optimize all of these things. And that's been a struggle for us historically, where we had sort of tech and then we had business, and then, okay, business doesn't really understand tech and tech doesn't understand business. So I think that's a really important component to have that sort of that product side, and it seems like all of us here have some responsible for product, and that's sort of a learning experience we had over the years.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a tough disconnect between the sales and product sometimes. Product will say, I have implemented the API, it is working, all the calls are functioning beautifully, but we're earning no money. So the job has been done, we've gone to scope. It's often the hardest part is trying to make sure that earning revenue is part of the initial scope of that, and the iterations are done again and again until the business objectives have been met too. So because the business side won't know which calls to do when or exactly what features to tweak, I think it helps to get that scope in the very beginning too. Say we need to do this integration and it should earn us $20,000 a month, because manually we've been earning $20,000 a month. So that's when it's done.
And it's usually a lot of back and forth in APIs.
Yeah.
You think you have something up and running, but there's always small glitches there. And I think it's very important to keep that communication between the different parties involved, because it could be small fixes that could fix and sort of 10 times double your revenue. And if we don't have that communication, we'll lose out on that revenue and we'll go elsewhere. So that's key, and then the challenge to always keep that and try to meet up and call and so on. And tech people are not always that social, so it's hard sometimes to sort of keep that communication going, but definitely that's a challenge, and it's very important.
I think also what we find is with every API that we work with, the metrics that we want to track are a little bit different. So of course there's always clicks and completes and terms, but there's a lot of other things that go on. And so putting together the reporting, and so you can really get a full picture of what's happening inside the API and how you can optimize it is another challenge that we approach.
One more question here. Sorry about that.
You only get one.
So in this transition period to mobile, right? So a lot of panelists are coming in through mobile devices. What are the best practices when you're connecting the demand and the supply? Who should be responsible as to whether to notate that this is a mobile-friendly, mobile-optimized versus taking it? So if you rely on the demand, could you trust, like, is somebody really running through it to say, show this, or they may not want it on a mobile device, or they may only want it on a mobile device. So, what are some of the best practices on who manages that piece?
Yeah, so I can say precision. So we define all of our projects as mobile, online, or both, because when you're connecting through a sample partner through an API, you don't have visibility to do the device detection to understand what environment that the survey was presented in. Was it a mobile environment? Was it an online environment? You really only get to have a look at that once they've clicked through on the survey. So it really has to land on the supplier side to do the filtering. And I think it's the API, the company giving out the APIs, their responsibility to test surveys and then share that information. That's how we approach it, at least.
I think the buyers also have some responsibility to report past performance. So has this survey got 20% conversion from mobile or 0.2%? The buyers usually have a little bit more information. The suppliers will go into there and find that same information too, but depending upon if you're single source versus multi-source, the later sources are going to have fewer information than the earlier sources.
Yeah. I think the trick there is to sort of automate that, and I think reporting by source is a great idea to see conversion, because conversion is key in this. We're going through a manual QA process on all the jobs going through, and the challenge there is to test. Usually we test desktop, but then you have to test on multiple devices, tablets, mobile devices, iOS versus Android. How deep should you go there? So that's something that we're debating internally. How should we really treat that, and how much can we report to our suppliers in the back end? So I think that's a very important point to provide as much data as possible that you have, and if we get data from our clients as well, but that would be great to sort of verify that and then pass that through to our suppliers.
There are possible ways to maybe automate that flow in terms of maybe having a bot go through and see if it gets stuck, but that can be challenging because you could have 20 different branches in your survey. But there might be some techniques there to send in a bot to the survey, see if they can't get past question 2 because its support needs flash, or it's got a grid where the submit button doesn't work, or there's various things that.
To follow on that too, not all surveys have test links, which is still a little surprising to me sometimes, but we need to have every survey have a test link that's available throughout the period so we can actually test.
All right. I think we've helped catch the conference up a little bit, but seems like if there's no other comments from the room, then we thank everybody for their time.